I hit the polished stone floor, and the whole room laughed like I was the evening entertainment. But the noise died the moment a man stepped out from the back row, the surgeon who put titanium in my leg. He spoke exactly 6 words, and from that second, my family started losing everything they loved. They didn't realize I hadn't come here to beg for pity. I came here to close the ledger. My name is Lila Scott. I am 34 years old, and tonight, I am the only stain on an otherwise spotless white tablecloth. The sedan I arrived in was a rideshare, a sensible, mid-range vehicle that smelled faintly of pine air freshener and someone else's cigarette smoke. It was a stark contrast to the parade of Bentleys, Mercedes, and vintage Jaguars lining the circular driveway of the Westbridge Hills Banquet Hall. The valet looked at my driver with a mixture of confusion and disdain, waving him through quickly as if the very presence of a Toyota might lower the property value of the entire North Carolina zip code. I thanked the driver and opened the door. The humid night air of the South hit me first, followed immediately by the sharp metallic click of my forearm crutch hitting the pavement. This was the sound of my life now. Click, step, drag. Tonight was my father's 60th birthday. Ray Lane, a pillar of the community, a titan of local real estate, and a man who treated his reputation like a Ming vase, something to be polished daily and kept behind glass, far away from clumsy hands. I was the clumsy hand. I adjusted the cuff of my dress. It was simple, navy blue, bought off the rack at a department store. It was clean and respectful, but in this world, respectful was just a polite word for invisible. I wasn't here to shine. I was here to fulfill an obligation, a silent summons that said my absence would cause more gossip than my presence, so I had better show up, smile, and try not to limp too noticeably. I made my way up the grand staircase. The architecture was designed to make you feel small, with towering columns and limestone steps that seemed to stretch up into the heavens. For anyone else, it was a grand entrance. For me, it was a tactical negotiation. Every step required a calculation of balance and pain tolerance. My left leg, encased in a supportive brace hidden beneath the fabric of my dress, throbbed with a dull, familiar ache. It had been 5 years. You would think the body would forget the trauma by now, but my body had a memory like a steel trap. The double doors swung open, pulled by staff members in uniforms that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. The noise hit me like a physical wave. A low roar of conversation, the clinking of crystal, the soft undercurrent of a string quartet playing something baroque and inoffensive. The smell was a suffocating blend of expensive perfume, prime rib, and old money. I stepped onto the marble floor. Click, heads turned. Not many, just the ones near the door. The reaction was always the same. First, the eyes would sweep over my face searching for the Lila they used to know. The athletic, vibrant girl who played tennis and hosted charity auctions. Then, the eyes would drop. They would hit the metal crutch clamped to my forearm. Then they would slide down to my leg. And finally, the expression would shift. Pity, disgust, superiority. It is a specific look reserved for the broken things in a room full of perfection. I kept my chin up. I had practiced this. I gripped the small envelope in my free hand tighter. Inside was a handwritten letter and a gift card to his favorite cigar shop. It was pathetic, really. $100. That was what I could afford without dipping into the savings I was aggressively protecting. To a man like Ray Lane, $100 was a rounding error on a lunch bill, but I wanted to give something. I wanted, for some stupid, stubborn reason, to be a daughter. Lila, a voice drifted toward me, laced with enough sugar to induce a diabetic coma. I didn't need to look to know who it was. The crowd parted naturally, like the Red Sea. For the golden child. Tessa Lane floated toward me. My younger sister looked like she had just stepped out of a magazine spread about how to live your best life while crushing everyone else's. She wore a shimmering gown of champagne silk that hugged every curve. Her hair cascaded in perfect, professionally styled waves, and diamonds glittered at her throat and ears. She stopped 2 feet away from me, invading my personal space with the scent of jasmine and entitlement. Her eyes scanned me, starting at my hair, lingering on the simple fabric of my dress, and ending, predictably, on the crutch. "You actually came," she said. Her voice was low, meant only for me, though her smile remained fixed for the room. "I told Mom you probably wouldn't make it, with the situation." She gestured vaguely at my leg. "It is Dad's 60th. Tessa," I said, keeping my voice even. "I wouldn't miss it," Tessa laughed, a light, tinkling sound that sounded like ice cubes hitting a glass. "Right, of course. It is just that, well, look at you." She reached out and plucked at the sleeve of my dress as if removing a piece of lint. "We have a certain aesthetic tonight. Black tie, elegant. This is very brave of you. I am wearing a dress. Tessa, I am clean. I am here. You are a buzzkill, Lila. That is what you are," she hissed, her smile never wavering. "Just try not to beg anyone for money tonight. Okay, Mason is trying to close a deal with the mayor's brother. We don't need you limping around looking like a charity case." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I swallowed it down. "I am not here for money." "Everyone knows you are always here for money," she countered. "That is what leeches do. They feed." She patted my arm, a gesture that looked affectionate from a distance but felt like a slap. "Grab a drink, sit in the back, try to be invisible. That is your best look." She swirled away, disappearing back into the circle of admirers. I stood there, the rhythm of my heart beating against my ribs. 1, 2, 3, breathe. I moved deeper into the room. The layout of the hall was treacherous. Round tables were packed tight, leaving narrow lanes for navigation. Waiters with trays of champagne wove through the gaps like dancers. I had to time my movements, planting the crutch, swinging the leg, checking for obstacles. Click. Drag. Step. I passed a table where my mother's charity circle was seated. These were women who spent their Tuesdays organizing galas to save endangered rhinos, but wouldn't spit on a homeless person if they were on fire. "Is that Lila?" I heard a whisper. It was Mrs. Higgins, a woman with hair so stiff it could withstand a hurricane. "Oh, poor thing," another voice replied. "She still hasn't recovered. It has been, 5 years? Some people just enjoy the victim role," Mrs. Higgins murmured, not bothering to lower her voice enough. "Ray pays for everything, medical bills, her apartment, her therapy. It must be draining him dry, and she just takes and takes." "I heard she was driving when it happened," the second voice added, deliciously scandalous. "Reckless, and now the family pays the price." I gripped the handle of my crutch until my knuckles turned white. The narrative. It was always the narrative. They had constructed a story around me, a cage made of lies and half-truths, and they had locked me inside it so securely that even I sometimes forgot where the door was. They said I was driving. They said I was unstable. They said I was a financial drain on the heroic Ray Lane, who suffered his crippled daughter with saintly patience. I walked past them, eyes fixed forward. There was a part of the truth I had buried deep in the soil of my own self-respect. I had kept quiet for 5 years. I had taken the blame. I had let them paint me as the villain in their perfect family portrait because I thought that was what love required. I thought if I absorbed the impact, the family would survive. I was an idiot. I found a spot near a large pillar, slightly obscured by a massive floral arrangement of white lilies. It was a good vantage point. From here, I could see the head table. My father, Ray, sat in the center. He looked regal. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his tuxedo tailored to hide the slight paunch of middle age. He was laughing at something the man next to him said, clapping him on the back. He looked like a man without a care in the world. Next to him sat my mother, Claudia. She was a statue of elegance, her posture rigid, her smile practiced. She was scanning the room, likely counting heads, calculating the net worth of the attendants. When her eyes swept over my area, they didn't pause. She looked right through me. To her, I was just a piece of furniture that didn't match the decor. And there was Mason Hartwell, Tessa's husband. He was leaning over Ray's shoulder, whispering something, pointing at a document on his phone. Mason was handsome in a generic, catalog model way, but his eyes were too close together, and his handshake always felt damp. He was the son Ray never had, the fixer, the financial wizard who was managing the family portfolio. I watched Mason closely. I watched the way his jaw clenched when he wasn't speaking. I watched the way his eyes darted around the room, not making contact with anyone for too long. He looked like a man walking on a tightrope who just realized the safety net was gone. "You are staring," a voice said from my left. I didn't jump. I turned my head slowly. Standing in the shadow of the heavy velvet drapes was a man who didn't belong here. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He wore a dark, charcoal suit that fit him with military precision. He held a glass of sparkling water, untouched, Dr. Julian Kerr. He was the orthopedic surgeon who had reconstructed my leg 5 years ago. He was the man who had spent 6 hours picking bone fragments out of my muscle and screwing titanium plates into my shattered tibia. He was also the only person in this entire zip code who had never looked at me with pity. "Dr. Kerr," I said, "I didn't know you were on the guest list." "I wasn't," he said calmly. His voice was deep, gravelly, a contrast to the falsetto chatter of the party. "I came as a +1 for a pharmaceutical rep who left 10 minutes ago. I decided to stay." "Why?" He turned his gaze toward me. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and uncomfortably perceptive. "Because I like to see the outcome of my work, and because you called my office 3 days ago asking for the files." I stiffened. "I didn't think you would bring them here." "I didn't bring the files, Lila," he said. "I brought the truth. Those are 2 different things." He looked out at the party, at Ray and Tessa laughing under the crystal chandelier. "They look happy," he observed. "They are," I said. "Ignorance is bliss." "And what about you?" Dr. Kerr asked. "Are you happy?" I looked down at my leg. I could feel the metal brace against my skin. "I am patient. There is a difference." "Patience has a limit," he said. "The bone healed, Lila, structurally. You are sound. You know that." "I told you that 6 months ago." "I know," I whispered, "but you are still using the crutch." "It is a prop," I said, my voice barely audible over the music. "They need to see me broken. It makes them feel safer. If I am broken, I am not a threat. If I am the leech, they are the hosts. It fits their story." Dr. Kerr took a sip of his water. "And tonight? Are we still sticking to the story?" I looked at the envelope in my hand, then I looked at Tessa, who was now holding court near the stage, laughing loudly, her head thrown back. I saw Mason wipe sweat from his forehead. I saw my father checking his watch, looking bored with his own celebration. I thought about the last 5 years, the lonely physical therapy sessions, the small apartment with the leaking faucet that I paid for by working late nights, the way they cut me out of photos, the way they talked about me in the past tense while I was standing right in front of them. I looked directly into the imaginary camera of my mind. The fourth wall dissolved. "No," I said softly. "Tonight, we are rewriting the script." Dr. Kerr nodded, a barely perceptible dip of his chin. "Good, because I hate bad fiction." "They are going to laugh at me," I said, watching Tessa point in my direction and whisper something to her friends. They all giggled. "Let them laugh," Dr. Kerr said. His eyes were cold, fixed on the stage. "Oh, I will," I replied. "Tonight, they will laugh at me, and then, before the cake is cut, they will cry for themselves." I took a deep breath. The air still smelled of expensive perfume and rot. I adjusted my grip on the crutch. Click! I stepped out from behind the pillar and began the long walk toward the head table. It was time to give Daddy his present. Tessa did not just step into my path. She materialized like a barrier reef, sharp and beautiful, and capable of tearing the hull off a ship. I was 3 steps away from the VIP section when she stopped me. Her hand, manicured to a lethal point, shot out and pressed against my chest. It was a light touch, barely a graze, but it halted my momentum completely. "Where do you think you are going?" she asked. Her voice was a low purr, audible only to me and the two unfortunate waiters trying to squeeze past us with trays of shrimp cocktail. "To give Dad his gift," I said. I held up the envelope. The paper felt damp in my palm. Tessa snatched it from my hand before I could blink. She held it up to the light, squinting at the thickness of the envelope as if she were inspecting a counterfeit bill. "A card." She raised an eyebrow. "Please tell me there is a check inside, a substantial one. Or did you write him a poem about your feelings? Dad hates feelings, Lila. Almost as much as he hates cheap stationery." "It is a gift card," I said, my voice steady. "For the cigar lounge he likes downtown." Tessa laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. "Cute. That might cover the tax on one box. I will take it. I will slip it onto the pile later. Underneath the keys to the vintage Porsche Mason and I got him, so it doesn't look so sad by itself." She tucked my envelope into her clutch like it was a used napkin she planned to throw away later. Then she stepped closer, invading my personal space. Her eyes raked over me, dissecting every inch of my appearance. "And you are not going up there," she whispered. "Not looking like this. You look like a substitute teacher who got lost on the way to a funeral." "I look fine, Tessa." "You look like a walking apology," she corrected. "Don't embarrass Dad. He's having a good time. He has forgotten about the unpleasantness. Don't remind him." I gripped my crutch. "I am his daughter. I am not an unpleasantness. To him, you are—" She smiled, and it was terrifying. "You are a walking overhead cost." A waiter passed by us, balancing a tray of heavy red wines, a Cabernet Sauvignon, judging by the color, deep, dark, and impossible to remove. I saw Tessa's eyes flick to the tray. I saw the calculation happen in real time. It took less than a second. She shifted her weight. Her elbow jutted out, seemingly by accident, catching the edge of the waiter's arm. It was a precise, practiced movement. The waiter stumbled. The tray tilted. Physics took over. The glass did not just fall. It launched. A wave of dark crimson liquid hit me squarely in the chest. It splashed across the modest neckline of my navy dress, soaking instantly into the fabric, running down my stomach, dripping onto my brace, and pooling on the pristine marble floor. The sound of shattering glass cut through the ambient chatter. "Oh my God!" Tessa shrieked. She jumped back, miraculously dry, her hands flying to her mouth in a performance of shock that deserved an Academy Award. "Lila, look what you did." The room went silent. The string quartet seemed to falter for a beat. 50 pairs of eyes swiveled toward us. I stood there, the cold wine seeping through to my skin. I could feel it trickling down my leg. Sliding under the straps of the brace, it was sticky and smelled of fermented grapes and humiliation. "I am so sorry," Tessa cried, loud enough for the back row to hear. She grabbed a linen napkin from a nearby table and began dabbing aggressively at my chest, driving the stain deeper into the fibers. "You are such a clumsy mess. Are you drunk? Did you drink before you came here?" "I haven't touched a drop," I said, knocking her hand away. "It is okay. Everyone," Tessa announced to the room, flashing a bright, apologetic smile to the onlookers. "Just a little accident. My sister is having a bit of a balance issue tonight. Nothing to worry about." She turned back to me, her face dropping the mask instantly. "You look disgusting. You smell like a dive bar." "You pushed him," I said quietly. "Prove it," she whispered. She snapped her fingers. A man in a tuxedo, the banquet manager, hurried over. He looked terrified. "Ms. Lane, I am so sorry. I will get a cleanup crew immediately." "Forget the floor," Tessa snapped. "Look at her. She can't stay at my father's party looking like a road accident. Do you have a spare uniform? A server's outfit?" "Anything." The manager blinked. "Well, yes, we keep spares for the staff. But—" "Get one," Tessa ordered. "Black pants, white shirt, whatever you have. Get her changed. Now." She looked at me, her eyes glittering with triumph. "Unless you want to leave. That would probably be better for everyone. But if you are so desperate to stay and eat the free food, you will wear what I tell you to wear. At least then you will blend in with the people who actually work for a living." I looked at her. I looked at the manager, who was shifting uncomfortably. I looked at the guests, who were whispering behind their hands, shaking their heads at the tragedy of Ray Lane's broken daughter causing a scene. I could have left. I could have thrown the wine in her face. I could have screamed that she pushed the waiter, but I didn't. I was investigating a crime, and you do not blow your cover just because the suspect spits on you. You wipe it off, and you keep recording. "Fine," I said. Tessa blinked. She hadn't expected compliance. She wanted a fight. She wanted me to cry so she could comfort me and look like the saint. "Fine," she repeated. "I will change," I said. "Where's the staff restroom?" The manager, relieved to avoid a shouting match, gestured toward a service door. "Right this way, ma'am." "Good," Tessa sniffed, turning her back on me. "And wash your face. You look pale." I followed the manager through the swinging doors, leaving the crystal and gold world behind for the sterile, fluorescent reality of the service corridor. The noise of the party faded instantly, replaced by the clatter of dishes and the shouting of cooks. The staff restroom was small, smelling of industrial bleach and cheap lemon soap. I locked the door and leaned my crutch against the sink. I looked at myself in the mirror. The wine stain looked like a gunshot wound in the center of my chest. My hair was frizzy from the humidity. My face was pale, just as Tessa had said. I stripped off the dress. It was ruined. I bundled it up and shoved it into the bottom of the trash bin. I didn't care. It was just fabric. The uniform the manager had handed me was stiff with starch. The black trousers were too long, bunching around my ankles, but they were wide enough to accommodate the bulk of my leg brace. The white button-down shirt smelled of commercial laundry detergent. It was scratchy against my skin. I buttoned it up to the collar. I rolled up the sleeves. I looked in the mirror again. I didn't look like a guest anymore. I looked like help. I looked like someone who cleared plates, refilled water glasses, and disappeared into the wallpaper. It was perfect. In a room full of peacocks. The sparrow is the invisible spy. They would ignore me even more now. They would speak freely in front of me because people like Ray and Tessa didn't think the help had ears. They didn't think the help had brains. I picked up my crutch. It was scratched. The gray rubber tip worn down on one side. For years, I had looked at this piece of metal as a shackle. I hated it. I hated the way it made my shoulder ache, the way it marked me as damaged goods. But tonight, looking at it under the harsh fluorescent lights, I saw something else. It wasn't a symbol of weakness. It was a receipt. It was the physical evidence of the night they decided their reputation was worth more than my spine. They wanted me to hide it? No. I would carry it like a weapon. I unlocked the door and walked back out. Click, drag, step. When I re-entered the ballroom, the atmosphere had shifted. The lights had dimmed. A spotlight was focused on the stage. My father was up there, Ray Lane. He stood behind a podium made of clear acrylic, looking every inch the titan of industry. He was holding a microphone, beaming at the crowd. "Thank you," Ray said, his voice booming through the speakers. "Thank you all. You know, a man is only as rich as the friends he keeps." A ripple of polite laughter and applause moved through the room. "And looking out at you all tonight," Ray continued, "I feel like the richest man in North Carolina." My mother, Claudia, stood a few feet away from him. She was wearing a silver dress that caught the light like chainmail. She was smiling that fixed, terrifying smile that never reached her eyes. She clapped her hands gracefully, her gaze sweeping the room to ensure everyone else was clapping too. I stood in the shadows near the kitchen entrance, dressed in my server's uniform. A waiter rushed past me with a tray of empty glasses, not even glancing at my face. To him, I was just a coworker. I saw Tessa in the front row, looking up at our father with adoration that looked pasted on. Mason was next to her, checking his phone, probably refreshing the tracking on a wire transfer. I checked my pocket. The envelope was gone, confiscated by Tessa, but I still had the second thing I had brought. I had slipped it from my dress pocket to the server's pants before I threw the dress away. A small, velvet box. Inside was a tie clip. It had belonged to his father. I had found it in a pawn shop 3 towns over, where he had sold it 20 years ago during a cash flow problem he claimed never happened. I had bought it back. I wanted to give it to him, not because he deserved it, but because I needed to know, for one final, absolute certainty, that there was nothing left to save. I needed to offer the olive branch so I could watch him snap it. I began to move. I stepped out of the shadows. The sound of my crutch on the marble was rhythmically distinct from the soft footsteps of the waiters. Clack, people turned. They saw the server's uniform. Then they saw the crutch. Then they saw the face. Recognition rippled through the crowd like a virus. Why is she wearing that? Did she get a job here? How embarrassing. The crowd didn't part out of respect. They parted the way you part for a person coughing up blood on a subway train. They recoiled. They didn't want to catch whatever bad luck I was carrying. They pulled their expensive fabrics back, creating a wide, lonely aisle straight down the center of the room. I kept my head high. I didn't look at them. I looked straight at the stage. Ray stopped speaking. He squinted against the spotlight, trying to see what was causing the disturbance. Then he saw me. His smile faltered. Just for a microsecond. A twitch of the lip, a tightening of the jaw. Then the mask slammed back into place, but it was thinner now. Claudia went rigid. She took a half step back as if she wanted to hide behind the podium. Tessa turned around, her eyes widening. She hadn't expected me to come back out. She expected me to hide in the kitchen or go home. She looked furious. I walked. It was a long walk. My arm burned. My leg throbbed. But I didn't break stride. Clack, step, drag. I could hear the whispers. They were loud. She is working the party. I heard Ray cut her off completely. Look at her shoes. Terrible. She is ruining the mood. I reached the edge of the dance floor, just below the stage. The distance between me and my father was only 10 feet vertical, but it felt like 10 miles of social stratification. I stopped. I looked up at him. He looked down at me. For a moment, there was no sound but the hum of the ventilation system. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Julian Kerr was standing near the edge of the stage, leaning against a subwoofer. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Ray. His face was unreadable, but his body language was coiled, like a panther waiting for a deer to make a mistake. He caught my eye. He didn't smile. He just blinked. Slowly, it was a signal. Steady. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small velvet box. I held it up. I didn't have a microphone, but in the silence, my voice carried. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said. Ray stared at the box. He didn't move to take it. He didn't signal for someone to help me up. He just stared, paralyzing fear behind his eyes that I might say something else, that I might say something true. "Security?" Mason's voice hissed from somewhere nearby. "Where is the damned security?" I stood there, offering the last piece of my heart to a man who was looking at me like I was a smudge on his camera lens. And that was when I knew. The ledger was open. And I was about to start writing in red ink. The distance between the marble floor and the raised platform was only 3 steps, 3 shallow, carpeted steps that separated the general population from the royalty of Westbridge Hills. I stood at the bottom, the velvet box in my hand feeling heavier than lead. My father, Ray, did not reach down. He did not extend a hand to help his disabled daughter navigate the elevation. He stood frozen behind the podium, his face a mask of irritated panic. He looked like a man watching a waiter drop a tray of soup. He was worried about the stain, not the scalded skin. I took the first step, my right leg, the good one, took the weight. I planted the gray rubber tip of my crutch on the second step. I engaged my core, preparing to hoist the dead weight of my left side. It was a mechanical process I had performed thousands of times over the last 5 years. Lift, swing, plant, then Mason Hartwell moved. He had been standing to the left of the stage, holding a Scotch glass, looking bored. But as I began my ascent, he drifted forward. It was casual. It looked like a man shifting his stance to get a better view of the speech, but I saw his eyes. They were not bored anymore. They were glittering with malice. He stepped down to the first riser, blocking my direct path. "Excuse me, Mason," I said, my voice low. "You are making a scene, Leela," he whispered, a smile plastered on his face for the benefit of the audience. "Just go back to the kitchen. You are ruining the video footage." "Move," I said. I shifted my weight forward, trusting the crutch. That was my mistake. I trusted the physics of the room to remain constant. Mason did not shove me. That would have been too obvious. That would have been assault. Mason was a white-collar predator. He preferred crimes that looked like accidents. He simply extended his left foot. The toe of his polished Italian leather Oxford hooked around the aluminum shaft of my crutch, just 2 inches above the rubber foot. He pulled back. A small, sharp jerk. It was enough. The rubber tip lost friction with the carpet. The support I was leaning on vanished into thin air. My center of gravity pitched forward violently. My arms flailed, seeking purchase on a railing that wasn't there. "Whoops," Mason said, loud enough for the front row to hear. I fought to recover. I had spent 5 years in physical therapy learning how to fall, how to tuck and roll to protect the bad leg. My brain screamed commands to my muscles: abort, twist, land on the right hip, but I never got the chance to land safely. Tessa was there. She moved with the speed of a striking cobra. She didn't reach out to catch me. She didn't grab my arm to steady me. She grabbed the crutch. Her fingers locked around the plastic handle while I was still teetering on the edge of equilibrium. She didn't just hold it, she yanked it. She ripped the only thing keeping me upright out of my hand with a ferocity that tore the skin on my palm. "Stop faking it!" Tessa screamed. Her voice tore through the banquet hall, shrill and triumphant. It bounced off the high ceilings and shattered the polite silence. "You are just leeching, enough is enough." Without the crutch, and with my momentum already compromised by Mason, I was defenseless against gravity. I fell. It wasn't a graceful swoon, it was a collapse. My body hit the edge of the second step hard, ribs first, driving the air from my lungs in a wet gasp. Then I tumbled backward onto the hard marble floor of the main level. Crack. The sound was sickening. It was not the sound of flesh hitting stone. It was the sound of structure failing. It was the sound of a dry branch snapping in a winter storm, but magnified by the acoustics of the ballroom. A white flash of agony exploded behind my eyes. It started in my left shin and shot up my spine, blowing out every other sensation in my body. It was a color, a taste, a noise all at once. It was the taste of copper and the color of burning magnesium. I lay there, curled on my side, gasping for air that wouldn't come. My vision swam. The crystal chandeliers above me spun in lazy, nauseating circles. The velvet box, the gift. I saw it sliding across the polished floor. It skittered past my head, spinning like a top, and came to a rest right at the edge of the stage, directly beneath the toes of Ray Lane's patent leather shoes. I looked up, through the haze of pain, at my father. He looked down at the box. Then he looked at me. For 1 second, I saw a flicker of something. Was it concern? Was it horror? No, it was annoyance. Ray lifted his foot and nudged the velvet box aside. He didn't pick it up. He didn't ask if I was okay. He kicked it gently, just enough to move it out of the frame of the photographer who was still snapping pictures. He kicked it like it was a piece of trash that had blown onto his porch. Then, the laughter started. It began with Mason, a deep, barking chuckle. "God, the drama," Mason said, shaking his head. "Give her an Oscar." Then Tessa joined in, clutching my crutch to her chest like a trophy. "See, I told you. She just throws herself around for attention. It is pathetic." And then, the room joined them. It started as a nervous titillation, a release of tension, but it grew. It morphed into something ugly. It was the laughter of a mob that had been given permission to hate. They had been uncomfortable with my presence all night, feeling guilty for judging the disabled girl. But now, Now Tessa had given them an out. I wasn't disabled. I was a fraud. I was a leech. I was a performer. And if I was a performer, then my pain was just a prop, and they were allowed to laugh at the slapstick comedy. Did you see that flop? She practically threw herself down. Drunk, definitely drunk. The sound washed over me, a tidal wave of derision. It was louder than the ringing in my ears. I tried to push myself up. I needed to get up. I needed to prove I wasn't just a body on the floor. I planted my hands on the cold stone. Get up, I whispered to myself. Get up, Lila. I tried to engage my legs. A scream tore out of my throat before I could stop it. It was raw, animalistic, and humiliating. My left leg didn't move. It couldn't move. The lower half of it was angled in a direction that legs are not supposed to go. The brace, the expensive carbon fiber support that was supposed to hold me together, was twisted. I looked toward the VIP table. I looked for my mother. Claudia was standing there, her hand covering her mouth. But she wasn't looking at me. She had turned her back. She was busying herself with her napkin, smoothing out wrinkles that didn't exist. She was erasing me from her reality. If she didn't see the daughter writhing on the floor, then the daughter didn't exist. The room began to darken at the edges. The pain was sending me into shock. The faces of the guests, the mayor, the bankers, the socialites warped into grotesque masks. They were all teeth and eyes, laughing, pointing, judging. "Someone call a cab," Ray said into the microphone, his voice echoing with distorted feedback. "Get her out of here before she hurts herself again." "No need for a cab," Mason sneered. "Just roll her out." I closed my eyes. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me. I wanted to dissolve. The physical pain was excruciating, a 10 out of 10. But the shame was off the charts. It was a cold, hollow thing that ate you from the inside out. And then, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, but a vibration I felt in the floorboards. Thud, 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 heavy, purposeful footsteps, not the clicking of heels or the shuffling of loafers. These were the strides of someone who owned the ground they walked on. The laughter near me died out first, choked off in mid-breath. Then the silence spread outward, concentric circles of quiet, radiating from the point of impact. The footsteps stopped right beside my head. I smelled expensive antiseptic soap and peppermint. I opened my eyes. A pair of polished black wingtips stood inches from my face. I looked up. The charcoal suit trousers were perfectly creased. Dr. Julian Kerr towered over me. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at Ray. He looked only at me. His face was devoid of the polite social mask everyone else wore. It was set in a line of grim, professional fury. He crouched down. He didn't care that his expensive suit pants were touching the dirty floor where wine had been spilled earlier. "Lila," he said. His voice was a low rumble, steady and grounding. "It hurts," I gasped, tears finally leaking out of the corners of my eyes. "Julian, it hurts." "I know," he said. He reached out. His hands were large, warm, and steady. He placed one hand on my shoulder and the other gently on my knee, stabilizing the joint. It felt like an anchor being dropped into a storm-tossed sea. The spinning stopped. The nausea receded just a fraction. He wasn't just a doctor in that moment. He was a barrier. He was a wall between me and the wolves. Slowly, deliberately. Dr. Kerr stood up. He didn't let go of my shoulder until he was fully upright, keeping a protective hand hovering over me. He turned to face the stage. He turned to face Tessa, who was still holding my crutch, her smile faltering as she realized the room had gone quiet. Dr. Kerr fixed her with a stare that could have cut glass. It was clinical. It was cold. It was the look of a coroner examining a particularly nasty cause of death. "She is faking it," Tessa squeaked, her voice trembling slightly under the weight of his gaze. "Everyone knows she is faking it. The doctor said she was healed years ago." Dr. Kerr did not shout. He did not raise his voice. He simply projected it, using the diaphragm control of a man used to commanding operating theaters. "I am the doctor, he said. The silence was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. You could have heard a heartbreak. He pointed a finger at my leg, then leveled it straight at Tessa's face. "She is not faking," he said, enunciating every syllable with lethal precision. "You re-broke it." The words hung in the air for a second, heavy and terrible. Then, chaos erupted, but I didn't hear it. I only looked at Julian, and for the first time in 5 years, I allowed myself to close my eyes and let go. He had the helm now, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that he was about to drive the ship straight through their hull. The silence in the ballroom was not empty. It was heavy, pressurized, and suffocating. It felt less like a birthday party and more like the tense inhale before a judge reads a verdict. Dr. Julian Kerr did not wait for permission. He did not wait for the shock to wear off. He moved with the terrifying efficiency of a man who makes life-or-death decisions before his morning coffee. He raised a hand, pointing a sharp finger toward the tech booth located on the mezzanine level. The audio technician, a young man who looked terrified by the sudden shift in atmosphere, froze. "Cut the music," Julian ordered. His voice was not loud, but it carried the distinct, metallic timbre of command. "And switch the input. Source B, now." The technician scrambled. The string quartet, who had been sawing away nervously at a Mozart concerto, stopped abruptly. The sudden absence of music made the ambient sounds of the room, the clinking of ice, the shuffle of feet, my own ragged breathing sound deafeningly loud. On the massive LED screen behind the stage, the slideshow of the Perfect Lane family flickered and died. The photo of Ray holding an oversized novelty check for a charity disappeared. The image of Tessa posing on a yacht vanished. For a second, the screen went black. Then, it blazed to life with a stark, blinding white light. It was not a photo, it was a radiograph. The image was 10 meters tall. It loomed over the guests, a high-definition testament to violence. It showed the lower leg of a human being, stripped of skin and muscle, reduced to the raw architecture of bone and metal. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It sounded like the room itself had been punched in the gut. The tibia was not a smooth, continuous column of white. It was a jagged landscape of trauma. A long titanium intramedullary nail ran down the center of the marrow canal, anchored by locking screws that looked like industrial bolts. But the horror was not the metal. It was the bone around it. At the midshaft, there was a dark, jagged line, a gap, a non-union where the bone had failed to knit back together, leaving the metal rod to bear the entire weight of the body. "Exhibit A," Julian said. He stepped away from me, walking toward the screen, turning the dance floor into a courtroom. He gestured to the image. "This is the left tibia of Ms. Lila Scott. Image taken 48 hours ago. What you are looking at is a hypertrophic non-union. The bone has not healed. It has not bridged. For 5 years. The only thing holding her upright is that rod." He turned back to the crowd. He looked at Mrs. Higgins. He looked at the business partners. He looked at every single person who had laughed. "That metal rod has a fatigue limit," Julian continued, his voice clinical, stripping away the social veneer. "It is designed to share the load, not carry it entirely. When you kick a crutch out from under a patient with this pathology, you are not playing a prank. You are subjecting hardware to torque forces it was never designed to withstand." He pointed to a second image that flashed onto the screen. It was a close-up of the screw heads. "When she fell just now," Julian said, "the torque likely caused a toggle effect at the distal locking screws. In layman's terms, you didn't just bruise her, you tore the screws through the bone." The room was paralyzed. The champagne glasses were lowered. The smiles were wiped clean, replaced by the pale, sick look of people realizing they had just cheered for a public torture session. I lay on the floor, the pain radiating in hot, thumping waves, but my mind was crystal clear. I watched them. I watched the shame wash over them. It was a beautiful sight. They looked at the giant X-ray. Then they looked at me. And then, inevitably, they looked at the floor. They couldn't hold my gaze. The narrative of the faker had just been incinerated by 10 meters of medical evidence. Tessa was the first to break the paralysis. She stood near the edge of the stage, her face flushed a blotchy red. She looked at the screen, then at the silent crowd, and she realized she was losing the audience. Tessa Lane did not know how to exist without an audience. "This is ridiculous," she shrieked, her voice cracked, high and desperate. "Turn it off. Someone turn it off." She pointed a shaking finger at Julian. "Who is this guy? I have never seen him before. He is an actor. Lila hired him. It is a deep fake that is not even her leg." "I am the chief of orthopedic trauma at St. Jude's," Julian said, cutting her off without even raising his voice. "And my credentials are public record, unlike your charity tax returns." "He is lying," Tessa yelled, stomping her foot like a petulant child. "She walks fine, I have seen her. She walks around her apartment without that crutch all the time. She is just doing this to ruin Daddy's night." Mason stepped forward. He had recovered his composure, or at least, the bully's version of it. He puffed out his chest, trying to physically intimidate the doctor. "Listen here, pal," Mason growled, moving into Julian's personal space. "I don't know what kind of sick show you are running, but this is a private event. You are trespassing. Get out before I have security throw you out." Mason reached out to grab Julian's lapel. It was a mistake. Julian didn't strike him. He simply caught Mason's wrist. It was a fast, precise movement. He held it, applying pressure to a specific nerve cluster. Mason gasped, his knees buckling slightly. "I wouldn't," Julian said softly. "I know exactly how much pressure it takes to dislocate the lunate bone in your wrist. Do you want a demonstration?" Mason froze. He looked at Julian's eyes and saw something he didn't understand, a man who wasn't afraid of money. Mason pulled his hand back, rubbing his wrist. Retreating a safe distance, the power in the room had shifted. It had flowed away from the podium, away from the diamonds and the tuxedos, and pooled around the man in the charcoal suit and the woman on the floor. My father. Ray Lane. Finally moved. He walked to the edge of the stage. He looked at the X-ray looming behind him, a giant, skeletal accusation. He looked at the guests who were now whispering, their phones out, recording. The live stream of The Perfect Family was becoming a viral horror show. Ray descended the stairs. He walked past Mason. He walked past Tessa. He came to where I was lying. He looked down at me, for a heartbeat. I thought he might apologize. I thought, perhaps, the undeniable image of my broken body might crack the shell of his narcissism. "Can you stand?" he asked. His voice was devoid of warmth. It was the voice of a CEO asking if a broken printer could still output a report. "No," I whispered. Ray looked at Julian. He didn't ask for a diagnosis. He didn't ask for a prognosis. "How do we kill this?" Ray asked. The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. "Excuse me," Julian asked, his brow furrowing. "The story," Ray snapped, gesturing vaguely at the room. "The optics. It is a disaster. If an ambulance comes here, the press will be all over it. Ray Lane's daughter crippled at birthday gala. I can't have that headline. Not this week. I have investors in the room." He turned to his wife. "Claudia, get her up. Get her out of sight." My mother, who had been frozen like a statue, jerked into motion. She descended on me, not with the gentle hands of a mother, but with the frantic energy of a cleaner trying to scrub a wine stain out of a rug before the guests noticed. "Up, Lila." "Up," Claudia hissed, grabbing my arm. "Stop making a scene. You are ruining everything." "Mom, I can't walk," I said through gritted teeth. "You have 2 legs. Use them," she snapped. "We are going to the VIP room, now. We are going to fix your face and wait until the guests leave. Then we can deal with whatever this is." She dug her nails into my bicep. She pulled. The pain in my leg flared again, a blinding white spike. I cried out. "Don't touch her," Julian warned, stepping forward. "I can handle it," I said. I looked at Julian. I needed him to know. I wasn't leaving the battlefield. I was just moving the command center. "Help me up," I said to him. Julian hesitated, then nodded. He bypassed my mother completely. He slid his arm around my waist, taking the entirety of my weight. He lifted me with a fluid, powerful motion. My left foot dangled uselessly, the toe dragging on the marble. "To the back," Ray ordered, pointing toward the heavy oak doors of the VIP lounge. "Mason, get the staff to clear the floor. Tell everyone it was a skit, a roast. Tell them anything." Ray marched ahead, his back stiff. He was already composing the lie. He was already calculating the cost of the bribe he would have to pay to keep this quiet. I hobbled forward, supported by the only man who saw me as a human being. I passed the guests. I passed Mrs. Higgins, whose mouth was hanging open. I passed the business partners who were averting their eyes, suddenly finding their shoes fascinating. They weren't looking at me with pity anymore. They were looking at me with fear, because they had seen the screen. They had seen the metal and the bone, and they realized that the girl they had called a leech was actually made of steel, and the family they admired was made of rot. I paused at the door of the VIP room. I turned my head slightly, looking back at the ballroom one last time. The screen was still on. The X-ray was still glowing, casting a ghostly blue light over the party. I looked at the camera of my mind. When the truth is big enough, I thought, it doesn't need anyone to believe it. It just needs people to look at it. The heavy doors closed behind us, sealing us in with the monsters, but they didn't know I had locked them in with me. The heavy oak door of the VIP lounge slammed shut, severing the connection to the ballroom. The sudden silence was jarring. The music, the chatter, and the hum of the party were instantly replaced by the sound of heavy breathing and the high-pitched whine of the air conditioning. I had barely steadied myself against the mahogany sideboard when the first blow landed. It was not a fist, it was an open palm, sharp and stinging. My mother, Claudia, had crossed the room with a speed that defied her age and her heels. The slap caught me on the left cheek, snapping my head to the side. The force of it rang in my ear, a dull echo to the throbbing pain in my leg. "You selfish, ungrateful little wretch," Claudia hissed. Her face, usually a mask of Botoxed serenity, was twisted into a rictus of pure rage. "Do you have any idea what you have done? Do you have any concept of the damage you just caused?" I slowly turned my face back to look at her. My cheek burned, but I did not touch it. I did not cry. I simply catalogued the sensation: assault, battery, domestic disturbance. I fell. "Mother," I said calmly, "your son-in-law tripped me. Your daughter broke my support." "Don't you dare blame them," she shrieked, raising her hand again. "Enough." Ray's voice cut through the air. He was standing by the door, locking it. He turned to face us, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked at me not with anger, but with the weary disappointment of a manager dealing with an incompetent employee. "Sit down, Claudia," Ray ordered. "Screaming won't fix the optics." He walked over to the long conference table that dominated the center of the room. This was where the family held its summits, where they discussed mergers, acquisitions, and which scandals to bury. "We have a situation," Ray said, pacing the length of the rug. "The guests are confused, the investors are spooked, but it is salvageable. We can spin this." He stopped in front of me. I was leaning heavily on the back of a chair, my knuckles white. Julian stood a few feet behind me, silent, a sentinel in a charcoal suit. Ray ignored him completely. "Here is what is going to happen," Ray said, his voice dropping to a persuasive, reasonable baritone. "You are going to go back out there. We will get you a wheelchair. You will take the microphone. You will tell everyone that this was a misunderstanding, a birthday skit that went wrong. You will say you are fine, that it was a prank, and you will apologize to Tessa for stealing her spotlight." I stared at him. The audacity was breathtaking. It was almost architectural in its structure. "You want me to apologize," I repeated flatly, "to the person who just refractured my tibia." "It is a stress fracture at best," Tessa piped up from the corner. She was sitting on a velvet sofa, dabbing at dry eyes with a napkin. "Don't be dramatic. And yes, you should apologize. This is Daddy's 60th. You made it all about you. Look at me. I am shaking. You humiliated me in front of the Hendersons." "Tessa is right," Ray said, checking his watch. "We have about 10 minutes before the cake cutting. If we control the narrative now, we can laugh it off. We can say it was performance art, a roast." "And if I refuse?" I asked. Ray stopped pacing. His eyes narrowed. The reasonable businessman vanished, replaced by the shark. "Then we have a different conversation," Ray said. "A financial one." He nodded at Mason. Mason Hartwell had been standing by the wet bar, pouring himself a drink. He set the glass down and picked up a leather portfolio he had brought in from the coat check. He walked over to the table and tossed a stack of documents onto the polished wood. They landed with a heavy, wet slap. "We were going to save this for tomorrow," Mason said, a smug grin spreading across his face. "But since you want to play hardball, let's skip the pleasantries." He slid the papers toward me. "Quit-claim deed," Mason said. "Transfer of property, the cottage on Elm Street." My heart gave a single, painful thump. The cottage. It was a tiny, dilapidated house my grandmother Ray's mother had left to me in her will before she died. She was the only person in this family who had ever loved me. The house was worthless to them, a tear-down in a transitional neighborhood. But it was mine. It was the only asset I had that didn't have Ray Lane's name on the deed. It was my escape plan. "Why would I sign this?" I asked. "Collateral," Ray said. He pulled a notebook from his inner pocket. It wasn't a digital tablet. It was a physical pocket ledger. Ray Lane trusted ink because ink could be burned. He opened it to a page marked with today's date. "I have been running the numbers, Lila," Ray said, running his finger down a column of figures. "You have been a very expensive investment. The surgeries 5 years ago, the rehabilitation, the therapy, the apartment we let you stay in for the first 6 months. I paid you back for the apartment," I said. "I have the bank transfers." Ray waved his hand dismissively. "Interest, Lila, opportunity cost. Do you know how much emotional capital we have spent on you? How much damage your condition has done to the family brand people talk? They think we are weak because we produce something broken." He tapped the notebook. $180,000. Ray said. The number hung in the air. "That is the figure," Ray continued. $180,000. That covers your medical deductibles from 5 years ago, which I graciously covered, the pain and suffering you have caused your mother tonight, and the projected loss of business from the scene you just caused. "You are billing me for my own assault," I said. It wasn't a question. "I am billing you for being a liability," Ray corrected. "Now, the cottage is worth maybe $150,000 in the current market. We will take the deed as a down payment. We will call it even on the rest if you go out there right now and fix this mess." I looked at the papers. I looked at the legal jargon that would strip me of my last safe harbor. "I have insurance," I said, my voice steady. "My insurance paid for the surgeries. I have the explanation of benefit statements. I paid the deductibles from my savings. I have the receipts. Dad, I don't owe you a dime." "Your insurance," Claudia laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You were on our policy, you stupid girl." "I was 29, I said. "I aged out of your policy at 26. I have been paying for my own coverage through my job." "Your job?" Tessa sneered. "What job?" "Scanning groceries, walking dogs. You never tell us what you do because you are ashamed of it." "It doesn't matter," Mason interrupted, leaning his knuckles on the table. "Here is the reality. Lila, you are going to sign the house over, because if you don't, things get very difficult for you." "Is that a threat?" Julian spoke for the first time since we entered the room. His voice was low, dangerous. "It is a fact," Mason said, turning to look at Julian with disdain. "You see, Lila here has a credit score, a delicate thing. I have friends in the credit bureaus. I have friends in the rental association. If she walks out of here without signing that paper, she is going to find that her credit score has accidentally dropped to 0. She will be flagged as a high-risk tenant. She won't be able to rent a cardboard box in this state. She will be homeless, crippled, and broke." Mason smiled. It was the smile of a man who enjoyed pulling wings off flies. So, Mason continued, the house, sign it over, we sell it, we recoup our losses, and maybe, if you are a good girl, Ray will let you move back into the pool house. We can set you up with a nice, quiet life, out of sight. I looked at them. I looked at my mother, who was checking her makeup in a compact mirror, indifferent to the extortion happening in front of her. I looked at my sister, who was scrolling through her phone, probably deleting negative comments on her social media. I looked at my father, who was watching me with cold calculation, waiting for me to break. And I looked at Mason, the architect of this trap, so proud of his little leverage. They really believed this. They believed they held all the cards. They believed I was the same frightened, confused woman who had woken up in a hospital bed 5 years ago, terrified and alone, willing to accept any lie to keep her family, but I wasn't that woman anymore. I let out a long, slow breath. No, I said. Ray sighed. Lila, don't be difficult. You have no leverage. I am not being difficult, I said. I am being precise. I pushed myself away from the chair I had been leaning on. My legs screamed in protest, but I ignored it. I limped toward the head of the table. Ray was standing there. The seat, a massive, high-backed leather throne, was empty. What are you doing? Ray asked, stepping back involuntarily. I didn't answer. I moved past him. I gripped the armrests of the chair. I turned around, and I sat down. I sat at the head of the table, the seat of power, the seat Ray Lane had occupied for 30 years. The room went silent. The visual was wrong. The hierarchy had been inverted. Get out of my chair, Ray whispered, his face turning a shade of purple I had never seen before. It is not your chair, I said. Not anymore. I placed my hands on the table. I looked at Mason. You mentioned my credit score, I said. You mentioned your friends in the bureaus. That is interesting, because manipulation of credit reporting for the purpose of coercion is a federal offense, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, extortion. Mason laughed nervously. Who is going to believe you? You are a mental case. I don't need them to believe me, I said. I need them to read the report. I turned my head slightly to the right. I looked at Dr. Julian Kerr. He was standing ready, his hand resting on the handle of a thick leather briefcase he had placed on the side table when we entered. He looked at me. I looked at him. I nodded. Once, a sharp, decisive dip of the chin. Julian picked up the briefcase. He walked to the table. He didn't look at Ray. He didn't look at Mason. He placed the heavy leather case in front of me. Dr. Kerr, I said, my voice changing. It wasn't the voice of a daughter anymore. It was the voice of a late examiner. Please proceed with the disclosure. Julian clicked the latches. Snap, snap. The sound was louder than the slap had been. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. But this time, the rat wasn't me. The briefcase hit the table with a sound that was heavier than it looked. It was a dull, authoritative thud, the sound of a gavel striking a block, or a coffin lid falling shut. It was a Halliburton Zero, brushed aluminum, vintage but immaculate. It sat on the polished mahogany surface of the conference table, right between Mason's chaotic pile of extortion paperwork and my resting hands. The room did not just go quiet, it went vacuum-sealed. My father, Ray, stopped mid-breath. His mouth was open, prepared to launch another negotiation tactic, but the words died in his throat. He looked at the case. Then he looked at Julian. Then he looked at me. For 30 years. Ray Lane had controlled every room he entered. He did it with volume, with size, and with the unspoken threat of his checkbook. But there is a different kind of power. A power that does not need to shout. It is the power of the auditor, the power of the subpoena, the power of the person who knows where the bodies are buried because she is the one holding the shovel. What is this? Mason asked. His voice had lost its oily confidence. It was thinner now, laced with a vibration of genuine unease. I didn't answer him. Not yet. I reached out. My hand was steady. The tremors that had racked my body on the floor of the ballroom were gone. replaced by the icy calm of professional detachment. I placed my thumbs on the twin latches of the briefcase. Click. The sound was sharp, metallic, and precise. It cut through the air conditioning hum like a gunshot. It was the sound of a lock opening, but to me, it sounded like a guillotine blade engaging. That click severed the last 5 years of my life. It cut away the daughter, the victim, the cripple, and the charity case. I lifted the lid. Inside, the case was organized with obsessive precision, files, hard drives, and right on top, resting in a custom leather slot, was a lanyard with an identification badge. I picked up the badge. It was heavy, weighted with a security chip and a holographic overlay. I didn't hand it to Mason. I didn't hand it to Ray. I placed it on the table and slid it. It hissed across the polished wood, spinning slightly, and came to a rest directly in front of Mason Hartwell. "Read it," I said. Mason stared at the card. He didn't want to touch it. He looked like it might be radioactive. "Read it," I repeated. My voice was not loud. It was the voice I used in deposition rooms. It was the voice that made CEOs sweat through their Italian suits. Mason picked it up. His eyes scanned the text. His pupils dilated. I saw the blood drain from his face, leaving his skin the color of old parchment. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing convulsively. "Cindervale Forensics," Mason whispered. The name meant nothing to my mother. She blinked, confused. "What is a Cindervale? Is that a temp agency?" But Ray knew. Ray Lane's eyes widened. He took a half step back, bumping into the sideboard. He knew Cindervale. Anyone who moved large amounts of money through gray channels knew Cindervale. We were not the police. We were the people the banks called when they wanted to destroy you without making the news. We were the forensic accountants who specialized in asset recovery and complex fraud. We were the sharks that ate the other sharks. "Read the title, Mason," I commanded. Mason's voice shook. "Lead forensic examiner, Lila Scott." "Lead examiner," I corrected. "Specializing in corporate embezzlement and shell company liquidation." I leaned back in my father's chair. It was comfortable. I could see why he liked it. "You called me a dog walker," I said, looking at Tessa. "You called me a grocery clerk. You told your friends I was living off state benefits and Dad's pity checks." Tessa was staring at the badge, her mouth slightly open. "Do you have a job?" "I have a career, Tessa, and it is a lucrative one." I turned my gaze to Ray. "I didn't need your money. Dad, I haven't needed your money since the day I left the hospital. I make more in a quarter than Mason makes in a year, and I don't do it by scamming my friends." "Then why?" Ray asked. His voice was hoarse. "Why the apartment? Why the cheap clothes? Why let us believe?" "Because I was working," I said. I reached into the briefcase and pulled out a thick file folder. It was red, in my line of work. Red meant priority target. "6 months ago," I said, opening the file. "My firm was retained by a consortium of investors. They were concerned about a series of irregularities in a real estate development fund based here in Westbridge Hills. They suspected the fund manager was running a Ponzi scheme, taking new capital to pay off old yield guarantees." I looked at Mason. He was trembling now, visibly shaking. He dropped my ID card. It clattered on the table. "I didn't know the name of the fund manager at first," I lied. I had known. "But I followed the money. Money has a distinct smell. Mason, especially dirty money, it smells like desperation." I pulled a single sheet of paper from the file. It was a spreadsheet, dense with data. "I tracked the routing numbers," I said. "I tracked the wire transfers, and imagine my surprise when the digital trail led me right back to the dinner table I grew up at." The room was silent, deadly silent. "You are lying," Tessa whispered. She tried to laugh, but it came out as a dry choke. "You are just making this up to scare us. You printed that badge at a copy shop. Mason is a genius. He is an investor." "Is he?" I asked. I looked at the paper in front of me. "Let's test that theory," I said. "Mason, on October 14th of last year, at 2:32 in the afternoon, You authorized a transfer of $55,000 from the Lane Family Trust to an entity called Blue Harbor Consultants, Cayman Islands. Mason flinched as if I had slapped him. On November 3rd, I continued, reading the next line. Blue Harbor Consultants transferred $48,000 back to a domestic account held at First National. The account holder is listed as T.L. Hartwell. I looked at my sister. T.L. Hartwell. Tessa Lane Hartwell. That is you, isn't it? Tessa's face went white. She looked at Mason. You said that was a dividend. You said that was the quarterly bonus. It wasn't a bonus, Tessa, I said coldly. It was a wash. He stole the money from Dad's trust, moved it offshore to clean it, took a cut for his fees, and then deposited the rest into your private shopping account. Stop it, Mason hissed. You can't prove that. I have the SWIFT codes. Mason, I said, holding up a printout. I have the IP addresses. I have the login timestamps. You logged in from your phone, the iPhone 15 Pro, the one you are holding in your hand right now. Mason instinctively gripped his phone tighter, as if he could crush the evidence inside it. And it wasn't just once, I said, flipping the page. December 12th, $72,000. January 8th, $30,000. March 1st, that was a big one, $110,000. I looked at Ray. He was leaning against the wall, looking old. Every number I read was a blow to his ego, a crack in his foundation. He prided himself on being the smartest man in the room. He prided himself on being in control, and he had been robbed blind, right under his nose, by the son-in-law he adored, while the daughter he despised took notes. You have been hemorrhaging cash for 2 years. Dad, I said. Why do you think he was so desperate for me to sign over the cottage? Why do you think he is pushing you to close deals with the mayor because the fund is empty? The liquidity is gone. He is robbing Peter to pay Paul, and Paul is waiting in the lobby with a baseball bat. That is enough, Mason shouted. He lunged toward the table. He wasn't thinking. He was panicking. He wanted to grab the file. He wanted to destroy the paper that was ending his life. He didn't make it. Dr. Kerr moved. It was a blur of charcoal wool. He stepped between Mason and the table. He didn't strike him. He simply occupied the space with such density that Mason bounced off him like a bird hitting a window. Sit down, Julian said. Mason stumbled back, catching himself on the edge of the sofa. He looked at Julian, then at me. He looked trapped. This is illegal, Mason sputtered. You hacked my accounts. That is inadmissible. I will sue you. I didn't hack anything, I said calmly. I am a certified examiner. I have a warrant. Well, technically, I have a court order granting me access to the records of Blue Harbor Consultants as part of an ongoing federal investigation into wire fraud. I closed the file. The soft slap of the cover closing was the final punctuation mark. I have been watching you for 8 months. Mason, I said. I watched you buy that Porsche for Dad with Dad's own money. I watched you pay for this party with funds you stole from the investors. I watched you frame me as a leech while you sucked the marrow out of this family's bones. I turned to my mother. She was sitting on the sofa, her hands trembling in her lap. She looked from Mason to Tessa to Ray. She was trying to calculate if there was any way to social climb out of a felony indictment. And you, I said, looking at Tessa, you told me I was embarrassing the family. You told me I was a stain. Tessa was crying now. But they weren't the pretty, manipulative tears she used on Instagram. These were ugly, snotty tears of terror. I didn't know, she sobbed. I swear, Lila, I didn't know. He just gave me the money. He said he was a genius. You knew enough to spend it, I said. Ignorance is not a defense in tax court. Tessa. I stood up. My leg hurt. The pain was still there, a dull roar in the background, but I barely felt it. The adrenaline of the kill was flooding my system. I picked up the crutch Tessa had thrown on the floor earlier. I inspected it. The aluminum was scratched. The handle was worn. I leaned on it, not because I was weak, but because it was mine. It was the only honest thing in the room. I looked at them. The perfect family. The pillars of the community. Ray, the fool king, Claudia, the enabler, Tessa, the beneficiary, Mason, the thief. They were all looking at me. And for the first time in my life, they saw me. They didn't see the broken girl. They saw the executioner. "You wanted to talk about debts," I said softly. "You wanted to talk about who owes who." I tapped the thick red file with my free hand. "You stole my crutch tonight because you wanted to see me fall," I said. "You wanted to prove I was weak." I locked eyes with Mason. "But you made a mistake. You thought I was leaning on that crutch because I couldn't stand on my own." I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "I wasn't leaning on it," I said. "I was resting." I picked up the red file and held it out to Ray. "You stole my crutch," I said, delivering the final blow. "But I hold your ledger. And guess what, Dad? You are in the red." The red file on the table was not just paper, it was a demolition order. I watched Ray stare at the cover. For the first time all night, he looked his age. The confident tan seemed to gray out under the harsh recessed lighting of the VIP room. He was holding the ledger of his life, and he was realizing the math did not add up. "You said he was a genius," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "You said Mason was the financial prodigy who was going to take the Lane legacy to the next level. That is why you let him handle the portfolio. That is why you let him handle the friends." Ray looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "He worked for the biggest firm in New York. He managed billions." "He was an analyst, Dad, a junior analyst," I corrected. "And do you know why he left? He told you he wanted creative autonomy. He told you the big banks were too slow for his vision." I reached into the file and pulled out a single, staple-bound document. It was a photocopy of a Form U-5. It is a document the securities industry uses to terminate a registration. It is the permanent record of a broker's death. "He didn't quit," I said. "He was fired? For cause?" I slid the paper across the mahogany. "Read the reason for termination. Dad, Section 7. Unauthorized trading in client accounts. Failure to adhere to compliance standards regarding risk disclosure." Ray picked up the paper. His hands were shaking. He read the line. He looked at Mason. Mason was cornered. He was standing near the wet bar, sweat beading on his forehead, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the granite counter. "They were jealous," Mason spat out, his voice cracking. "I was making too much money. I was outperforming the senior partners. They concocted that violation to steal my book of business. You don't understand how the industry works. Lila, you are just an accountant." "I am a forensic examiner," I said calmly. "And I understand exactly how the industry works. That is why I know what a Ponzi scheme looks like." The word hung in the air. Ponzi. It is a dirty, heavy word. It implies a special kind of betrayal. "What are you talking about?" my mother, Claudia, asked. She was twisting her pearl necklace, looking between us with wide, frightened eyes. "Mason manages the Westbridge Growth Fund. It is exclusive. Mrs. Higgins just put $200,000 in last week. She told me over cocktails." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Of course she did," I said. "Because Mason promised her a guaranteed 12% return. Didn't he? In a market that is flatlining, he promised 12%, risk-free." I pulled out a spreadsheet. It was color-coded. It was a map of the destruction. "The Westbridge Growth Fund does not exist, Mom. There is no brokerage account. There are no stocks. There are no bonds." I pointed to the columns on the spreadsheet. "Here is the inflow," I said. October 1st, Mrs. Higgins wires $200,000. October 3rd, Mr. Henderson. Dad's golf partner wires $150,000. October 5th, you, Dad, transfer $50,000 for the expansion project. I moved my finger to the next column. And here is the outflow. October 6th, Mason pays out $20,000 to the mayor's brother as his quarterly dividend. That is not profit. Dad, that is Mrs. Higgins's money. He is taking the new money to pay the old investors to keep them happy, to keep them talking, to keep them recruiting more victims. Ray dropped the Form U5. It fluttered to the floor. The guests, Ray whispered. The people outside. Yes, I said. Almost every single person drinking your champagne right now. The people you have known for 20 years. The people you convinced to trust him. They are all in, and they are all wiped out. No, Ray said. He looked at the door of the VIP room as if the police were already battering it down. It is not possible. He showed me the statements. I saw the graphs. The fund is up 18% this year. Adobe Photoshop, I said. It is amazing what you can do with a template and a color printer. I checked the custodial banks listed on those statements. Dad, the account numbers, they are fake. They don't exist. Mason let out a sound that was half growl, half sob. He pushed himself off the counter. His eyes were wild. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the red file, the evidence. Give me that, Mason screamed. He lunged. It was a desperate, clumsy move. He threw himself across the table, his fingers clawing for the spreadsheet, for the papers, for the proof of his crimes. He never reached them. Dr. Julian Kerr moved with the economy of a man who understood leverage better than any banker. He didn't punch. He didn't tackle. He simply stepped into the gap and extended a stiff arm. Catching Mason squarely in the chest, it was like watching a car hit a bollard. Mason stopped dead. The air rushed out of his lungs. Julian didn't shove him back. He just held him there, immobile, with one arm. Sit down, Julian said. His voice was a low rumble, vibrating with controlled violence. He looked Mason in the eye, and Mason saw something there that terrified him more than prison. He saw a man who would break his other wrist without blinking. Mason crumbled. He slumped back into the leather chair, gasping for breath, defeated. It is over. Mason, I said. I have already sent copies of these files to the secure server at my firm. Burning them won't save you. The room was silent again, save for Mason's ragged breathing. Then, there was movement on the velvet sofa. Tessa stood up. My sister, the golden child, the one who had never faced a consequence in her life. She looked at Mason, huddled in the chair, and her face twisted. It wasn't pity. It was self-preservation. You bastard! Tessa shrieked. She threw her empty wine glass at him. It shattered against the wall above his head. You lied to me, she yelled, pointing a manicured finger at her husband. You told me you were a genius. You told me we were rich. I trusted you. How could you do this to us? How could you do this to Daddy? She turned to Ray, tears streaming down her face, perfect, tragic tears. Daddy, I didn't know, she wailed. I am a victim too. He fooled me, just like he fooled you. I signed those papers because he told me to. I didn't know he was stealing. You have to believe me. She rushed toward Ray, arms outstretched, looking for the shelter of his authority. She was playing the innocent daughter card. It was her best card. It had worked for 30 years. Ray looked at her. His face softened. He was about to reach out. He was about to accept the narrative that his precious Tessa was just a naive casualty of a wicked man. Stop, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it froze Ray in his tracks. I didn't look at Tessa. I looked at the red file again. I flipped a page. The victim narrative doesn't fit the data. Tessa, I said. Shut up, Tessa screamed at me. You are enjoying this. You are just trying to drag me down with him. I am not dragging anyone, I said. I am just reading the ledger. I pulled out another sheet. This one was a timeline. January 15th, I read. Mason transfers $12,000 from the fraudulent growth fund account to your personal checking account. The memo says, consulting fee. I looked up at her. January 16th, I continued. You spent $11,000, $500 at the Cartier boutique in Charlotte, a love bracelet, diamond paved. Tessa's hand instinctively went to her wrist. She covered the bracelet with her other hand. February, I said. Another transfer. $15,000. February 3rd. You booked a first-class trip to St. Bart's for you and your influencer friends. Mason didn't go. Just you. I stood up, leaning on my crutch. You knew the money was coming from somewhere. Tessa. You didn't ask where because you didn't care. You knew Mason wasn't working. You knew he was home by 3 every day. You knew the math didn't work, but as long as the transfers cleared, you were happy to play the role of the rich wife. I thought it was his bonus, Tessa stammered, her voice losing its power. Every month, I asked. For 2 years. You are not stupid. Tessa, you are greedy. There is a difference. I turned to Ray. She spent the money. Dad, she spent Mrs. Higgins's retirement. She spent the mayor's investment. She is wearing the evidence. That dress, stolen money. Her shoes, stolen money. She is walking around in the wreckage of your reputation. Ray looked at Tessa. He looked at the bracelet she was hiding. He looked at Mason, who was staring at the floor. And finally, the reality hit him. It wasn't just money. It was his name, Ray Lane. The name on the buildings. The name on the charity boards. The name he had spent 60 years polishing until it shone. Mason hadn't just stolen cash. He had eaten the family from the inside out. He had turned the Lane name into a synonym for fraud, and Tessa, his princess, had been holding the fork and knife. Ray sank into a chair. He put his head in his hands. They will arrest him, Ray whispered. Here, tonight. Eventually, I said. But not tonight. Ray looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. What can we fix it? Can we pay them back? You don't have enough liquid assets to pay them back. Dad, I said brutally. Mason has burned through nearly $3 million, unless you want to sell the house, the cars, and the vacation property tomorrow. You are underwater. Ray went pale. But the police aren't here yet, I said. My firm is building the case for the SEC. It takes time to finalize the indictment. Usually, Mason asked, lifting his head. I looked at my watch. It was a simple analog watch, not a Rolex, reliable, accurate. It is 9:30, I said. The banks open at 9 tomorrow morning. I looked at Mason, then at Ray. I haven't submitted the final affidavit yet, I said. I have the evidence, I have the tracing, but I haven't pressed the button that freezes the accounts. What do you want? Mason asked. He sounded desperate. I will give you a cut. I will give you anything. I laughed. It was genuine laughter this time. I don't want your dirty money. Mason, I told you, I have a career. I walked over to the window. I pulled back the heavy velvet curtain slightly. I could see the driveway outside. The valet was parking a Rolls-Royce. You think this is the worst part, I said, looking at the reflection of my family in the glass. You think the embezzlement is the bomb, but it is not. That is just the fuse. I turned back to face them. There is something else, I said. Something bigger than the fund. Something that involves the very roof over your heads. What are you talking about? Ray asked. The house is paid off. I paid the mortgage 10 years ago. You did, I agreed. But Mason needed more capital. The Ponzi scheme was hungry. He needed a big injection of cash to pay off a whale investor 6 months ago. I looked at Tessa. She stopped crying. She went very, very still. Tell him, Tessa, I said. Tell me what? Ray demanded, standing up. Tessa, what did you do? Tessa shook her head frantically. No, that is not we fixed that. Mason said he fixed that. Nothing is fixed, I said. I looked at my watch again. You have 12 hours, I said. 12 hours before the sun comes up. 12 hours before the sheriff's deputies come to the front gate, not for the fraud, but for the eviction. Eviction, Claudia screeched. This is a $5 million estate. Not anymore, I said. And wait until you see whose signature is on the loan documents. I paused. I let the silence stretch until it was thin and screaming. "You should probably sit down again, Dad," I said. "Because the next piece of paper in this bag doesn't just break the bank, it breaks the law." Ray sat in the high-backed leather chair, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. The revelation about the investment fund had been a body blow, but he was a survivor. I could see the gears turning in his head. He was already thinking about liquidation, about restructuring, about selling off assets to plug the hole Mason had blown in the hull of the Lane. "It is bad," Ray said, wiping sweat from his upper lip with a monogrammed handkerchief. "It is a disaster, but we still have the hard assets. We have the estate, we have the portfolio of rental properties, we can liquidate, we can pay off the investors before they go to the DA. It will be tight, but we can survive this." He looked at me, almost pleading for validation. "The house is valued at $5 million, Ray calculated, his voice gaining a frantic sort of speed. "No mortgage. That is $5 million in equity. We can take a bridge loan tomorrow morning. Mason, you are fired, obviously, but we will use your contacts to expedite the—" "Stop," I said. The word was not loud, but it had the finality of a coffin lid slamming shut. I reached into the Halliburton case again. This time, I didn't pull out a red file. I pulled out a black one. "You keep doing math based on numbers that do not exist, Dad," I said. "You think you have equity? You think you have a safety net?" I placed the black file on the table. "You don't even have a roof," I said. I opened the file. On top was a glossy brochure. It featured a sprawling Mediterranean-style villa with an infinity pool overlooking the hills. It was the house Tessa posted on her Instagram every day. She tagged it, "My Sanctuary Home Lane Legacy." "Let's start with the satellite offices," I said, sliding the brochure toward Tessa. Tessa flinched. She knew what was coming. "The Villa Medici," I said, reading the name from the brochure. "Tessa's home, the place where she films her lifestyle coaching videos, the symbol of her independent success." I pulled out a document stapled to the back of the brochure. "Lease agreement," I read. "Short-term corporate rental, $3,000 a week." I looked at Ray. "She doesn't own it, Dad. She never did. She rents it. It is a set, a stage. And do you know who pays the rent?" I flipped the page to the billing section. "The Westbridge Growth Fund," I said. "Mrs. Higgins paid for the pool cleaning last month. Mr. Henderson paid for the landscaping." "It is branding," Tessa shouted, her voice shrill and desperate. "You don't understand marketing. Lila, I have to look successful to attract high-value followers. It is an investment in the family image." "It is fraud," I countered. "But that is not the worst part. The worst part is what happened when the fund started to dry up." I turned my attention back to Ray. "6 months ago," I said, "Mason's Ponzi scheme hit a liquidity crunch. He had too many investors asking for withdrawals, and not enough new suckers coming in. He needed cash, fast, big cash." I pulled out a thick stack of papers. These were legal-sized, bound in blue backing. "A deed of trust," I said, "securing a hard money loan, high interest, short-term, the kind of loan you go to when the banks won't touch you." "I never signed for a loan," Ray said, shaking his head vigorously. "I haven't borrowed a cent in 10 years. "I know you didn't," I said. I opened the document to the signature page. I smoothed it out on the table. "But your signature is there," I said. Ray leaned forward. He squinted. There, on the line marked Grantor, was the sweeping, bold signature of Ray Lane. Beside it, the elegant, loopy script of Claudia Lane. "That is my signature," Ray whispered, confused. He looked at his hand as if it had betrayed him. "Look closer," I said. I pulled a magnifying glass from my kit standard issue for a forensic examiner and held it over the paper. "Look at the pen pressure," I instructed. "See the hesitation marks at the top of the R. See the slight tremor in the loop of the L. That is not the stroke of a man signing his name for the 10,000th time. That is the stroke of someone drawing a picture of a signature. I moved the glass to Claudia's name. And Mom, I said, you always dot the I in Claudia with a slight dash to the right. This dot is perfectly round. It is careful, too careful. Claudia gasped. She covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes darting to Tessa. Tessa, Claudia breathed. Tessa, you used to practice my signature in high school, to sign your report cards. Tessa was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face, ruining her professional makeup. I had to. Mason said we were going to lose everything. He said it was just a bridge loan. We were going to pay it back in 2 months, he promised. You forged our names. Ray's voice was barely a whisper. The betrayal was finally hitting him. It wasn't just money. It was identity theft. His own daughter had stolen his hand. How much? Ray asked. How much did you borrow against the house? I looked at the document. $2.5 million. I said. Ray grabbed his chest. He literally grabbed his chest, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. $2.5 million, he wheezed. At what rate? 18%, I said. Compounding monthly, with a default penalty of 10%. Oh my God, Claudia moaned, sinking back into the sofa. We are ruined. It gets better, I said, my voice devoid of mercy. Or worse, depending on your perspective. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was pink. In the world of real estate law, pink means blood. Notice of default, I read. Dated 90 days ago. You didn't make the payments. Tessa, you took the $2.5 million, and you didn't pay the loan. You didn't even pay the interest. We were going to, Tessa sobbed. But Mason said we needed to maintain appearances. We had to go to Fashion Week. We had to renew the lease on the villa. We needed to project success to get new investors to pay off the loan. You spent the bailout money on handbags and plane tickets, I summarized. I pulled out a bank statement. It was the transaction history for the account where the loan proceeds were deposited. Look at this, Dad, I said, pointing to the lines. Chanel, Louis Vuitton, the Four Seasons in Maui, private jet charter. This wasn't a business strategy. It was a shopping spree. I looked at Tessa. You burned through $2.5 million in 6 months. I said, that is almost impressive. It takes a special kind of gluttony to eat a house that fast. Mason, who had been silent, suddenly spoke up. It was her idea, he shouted, pointing an accusing finger at his wife. She threatened to leave me if I didn't maintain her lifestyle. She said she wasn't going to be a poor banker's wife. She forced me to find the money. You liar, Tessa screamed, lunging at him. You brought the papers home. You told me where to sign. You said it was just paperwork for the trust. You said Daddy would never know. You practiced the signatures for 3 hours, Mason yelled back. I watched you. You traced them on the light box in your studio. Because you told me to. They were tearing each other apart. The perfect couple. The power couple. They were nothing but 2 rats in a sinking bucket, climbing over each other to breathe. Ray slammed his hand on the table. Silence, he roared. The room went quiet. Ray was breathing hard. He looked at me. Lila, he said, the notice says 90 days. That means we have time. We can negotiate. I can call the bank. I know people. It is not a bank, Dad, I said. It is a private equity firm, a hard money lender. They don't care who you know. They care about the contract. I pulled out the final document. It was a court order, stamped, signed, sealed. Writ of possession, I said. I looked at my watch. You don't have time, I said. The 90 days are up. The grace period is over. The foreclosure has already been adjudicated. It happened last week, in a courtroom 3 counties over, where notice was sent to a P.O. box. Mason set up so you wouldn't see the mail. I slid the writ toward Ray. Read the date of execution, I said. Ray picked up the paper. His eyes scanned down to the bottom. December 4th, he read. At 0800 hours. He looked up at me. That is tomorrow, he whispered. That is tomorrow morning. That is 10.5 hours from now, I corrected. No, Claudia whispered. No, they can't. This is my house. I designed this room. They can't just take it. They can, I said. And they will. At 8 a.m. sharp, the sheriff's department will arrive at the front gate. They will have a locksmith with them. They will give you 10 minutes to gather essential personal items. Then they will escort you off the premises. Then they will change the locks. We have to stop them, Ray said. Standing up, he was frantic now. I will sell the assets. I will sell the boat, the cabin in Aspen. We can raise the cash tonight. I will call the broker. I shook my head. It was almost pitiful to watch. You can't sell the boat, Dad, I said. Why not? It is worth $500,000. Because Mason sold it 6 months ago, I said. Ray froze. What? He forged the title transfer, I said. He sold it to a charter company in Florida. You have been paying dock fees for a phantom ship. The cabin, Ray asked, his voice trembling. Encumbered, I said. Second and third mortgages. Mason stripped the equity out of it last year to pay off a gambling debt in Vegas. Did I mention he gambles? He's not very good at it. Ray sank back into the chair. He looked around the room, the VIP lounge, the expensive paneling, the crystal decanters. It was all smoke. He was standing in a hollow shell. Everything, Ray asked. Everything is gone. The liquidity is gone, I said. The equity is gone. The reputation is about to be gone. And tomorrow morning, the shelter is gone. Tessa was sobbing into her hands, a low, keening sound. Mason was staring at the wall, catatonic. Ray and Claudia looked at each other. Then, slowly, they turned to look at me. I saw the shift in their eyes. 5 minutes ago, I was the enemy. I was the traitor. I was the ungrateful daughter exposing their shame. But now I was the only person in the room who wasn't drowning. I was the only person with a job. I was the only person with a clean record. I was the only person with access to reality. Lila, my mother said. Her voice was trembling, soft, pleading. It was the voice she used when she wanted a discount at a boutique. Lila, honey, you are an expert in this. You fix things like this. That is what you do, right? I investigate things like this. Mom, I said. I don't fix them for the perpetrators. But we are family, Ray said. He leaned across the table. He reached out his hand, trying to touch mine. Lila, look at me. I am your father. We made mistakes. Yes, we judged you. We were wrong. We are sorry. Truly sorry. He squeezed his eyes shut for a second, forcing a tear out. It was a good performance, almost convincing. But you can't let them throw us on the street, Ray said. You have resources. You said you make money. You have connections. You can stop the sheriff. You can pay off the arrears. We can work out a payment plan. Just make it go away, please. I looked at his hand. It was manicured, soft. It was the hand of a man who had never done a day of hard labor in his life. I looked at my mother. She was nodding eagerly, her eyes wide with hope. They didn't love me. They didn't even like me. They just realized I was the only lifeboat left on the Titanic. They loved the escape route. They loved the checkbook they thought I might open. I pulled my hand away from Ray's reach. I stood up. I picked up my crutch. I adjusted the cuff of my server's uniform, the uniform Tessa had forced me to wear. You called me a leech, I said. The room went dead silent. For 5 years, I continued. You told everyone I was a parasite. You told them I was draining you dry. You told them I was useless. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was ticking. But a leech takes blood, I said. I never took anything from you that I didn't pay for. Mason and Tessa. They are the leeches. And you? You are the host that let them feed because they looked pretty while they did it. I picked up the Halliburton case. I snapped the latches shut. Click, click. I can't stop the sheriff. Dad, I lied. I could have bought the debt. I had the liquid capital, but they didn't need to know that. The writ is issued, I said. The law is the law. I walked toward the door. Julian stepped aside to let me pass. Opening the heavy oak door, the sounds of the party drifted in the oblivious laughter of guests who didn't know they were drinking with corpses. I stopped in the doorway. I turned back one last time. They were a tableau of ruin. Tessa on the floor, Mason in shock, Ray and Claudia huddled together, looking old and small. "Tomorrow morning," I said, my voice cold and clear. "When the locksmith starts drilling out the cylinder, who are you going to call?" I paused. "Are you going to call the golden child?" I asked, looking at Tessa. "Or are you going to call the leech?" I didn't wait for an answer. I walked out, and for the first time in 5 years, my limp didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a stride. I had my hand on the brass doorknob of the VIP lounge. The metal was cool under my palm, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the room behind me. I had dropped the financial bomb. I had exposed the fraud. I had revealed the eviction. I should have walked out. I should have left them to drown in the rising tide of their own consequences, but Ray Lane could not let it end. He could not let me have the last word. "After everything we did for you," Ray's voice grated against my back. It was low, shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. "You would leave us like this after the accident, after we paid the best surgeons, after we nursed you back from the brink of death." I stopped. My grip tightened on the doorknob until my knuckles turned white. The accident. It was the foundational myth of our family, the cornerstone of their martyrdom and my shame. For 5 years, they had used that night as a bludgeon. They had painted a picture of a reckless, out-of-control daughter who destroyed a car and her own body, forcing her saintly parents to pick up the pieces. I took a breath. The air in the room tasted stale, recycled, and full of lies. I turned around. I didn't walk back to the table. I didn't need to sit down. I stood by the door, leaning on my crutch, and I looked at them. "Let us talk about the accident. Ray," I said. I dropped the dad. He lost that title the moment he tried to bill me for my own trauma. I reached into the Halliburton case one last time. There was one file left. It was thin. It wasn't red or black. It was a pale, faded manila folder, the kind used by the county police department 5 years ago. "You keep talking about how you saved me," I said, opening the folder. "You keep talking about the surgeries, the medical bills, the burden." I looked at Tessa. She was still on the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of her lies, mascara running down her cheeks. But when I mentioned the accident, she stopped crying. Her body went rigid. Her eyes, which had been filled with self-pity, suddenly went wide with a primal terror. "Don't," Tessa whispered. "Lila, please, don't." 5 years ago, I said, my voice steady, dragging the memory out of the dark. November 18th, a rainy Tuesday, the highway near the ridge. I didn't need the file to remember. The images were burned into my retinas. I saw the flash of headlights. I heard the sickening screech of tires losing traction on wet asphalt. I smelled the acrid, chemical stench of the airbag deploying a smell like burnt dust and gunpowder. I felt the crushing weight of the dashboard collapsing onto my legs, and I remembered the silence, the terrible silence before the screaming started. "We were coming back from Tessa's showcase," I said. She had just won the regional modeling competition. She was the star. She was going to be the face of the Lane brand. I looked at my mother. Claudia was pale, her hand clutching her throat. "I wasn't driving. Mom," I said. The sentence hung in the air. Simple, absolute. "You told the police I was driving," I continued. "You told the insurance company I was driving. You told the doctors, the neighbors, and the press that Lila, the unstable older sister, lost control of the vehicle." "You were confused," Ray said quickly. His voice was too loud. "You had a concussion. You didn't know what was happening. We had to make the statement for you." "I had a concussion," I agreed. "But I wasn't amnesiac. I remember waking up in the ICU 3 days later. My leg was in traction. My ribs were taped. And you were there. Ray, you and Mom. You were sitting by my bed." I looked at him. forcing him to meet my gaze. You didn't ask how I was feeling, I said. You told me the plan. You said, Tessa has a future. Lila. Tessa has the contracts. Tessa can't have a DUI on her record. She can't have a reckless driving charge. It would ruin her. Tessa made a small, whimpering sound. She curled into a ball, hiding her face. So you made a trade, I said. You looked at your 2 daughters, and you did a cost-benefit analysis. Tessa was the asset. I was the liability. So you moved me. We did not move you, Claudia protested weakly. You moved me, I repeated. I was unconscious in the passenger seat. Tessa was screaming in the driver's seat, terrified. Not a scratch on her, and before the ambulance arrived, you told Tessa to say I was driving. You told her to say I insisted on taking the wheel because she was tired. I flipped the page in the manila folder. I took the blame, I said, because I loved her, because I was the big sister, and I thought that is what big sisters do. I thought if I took the hit, you would love me for it. I thought you would be grateful. I laughed bitterly. But you weren't grateful. You were relieved. And then, slowly, you started to believe your own lie. You started to treat me like the screw-up. You started to resent me for the medical bills that her driving caused. You gaslit me for 5 years into believing I owed you for fixing the leg that she broke. It was a complicated situation, Ray stammered. We were trying to protect the family. Tessa was fragile. You were always stronger. Lila, we knew you could handle it. I could handle the pain, I said. I couldn't handle the betrayal. I pulled a document from the folder. It was new. The ink was fresh. For 5 years, I thought it was just my word against yours, I said. I thought I had no proof. The police report said I was the driver. The case was closed. I slid the paper across the table. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a sworn affidavit. But then I started digging into Mason, I said, and I found something interesting in his Venmo history. A recurring payment to a retired police officer named Sergeant Reynolds. Ray went still. He knew the name. Reynolds was the first responder on the scene that night, the man who wrote the report. Reynolds retired 6 months after the crash, I said. Paid off his mortgage, bought a boat, nice life for a public servant, I pointed to the affidavit. But Reynolds got nervous when the FBI started asking questions about Mason's fraud, I said. He thought he was being investigated for the bribe, so he talked to me. He wanted immunity. I gave it to him. This is a lie, Mason whispered, but he didn't sound convinced. Read it, Ray, I said. It is a sworn statement. Sergeant Reynolds admits that when he arrived on the scene, Tessa Lane was in the driver's seat. He admits that Ray Lane arrived 5 minutes later and offered him $50,000 to alter the report. He admits that he helped you drag my unconscious body across the center console while my leg was shattered. I saw the color drain from my mother's face. She looked like she might faint. The brutality of the image, her husband and a cop dragging her broken daughter like a sack of potatoes to frame her, was too much even for her cognitive dissonance. You dragged me, I said, my voice trembling slightly with the suppressed rage of half a decade. I can still feel the tearing. Ray, I have nightmares about the movement. That is why the bone didn't heal right the first time. The trauma of being moved compounded the fracture. We didn't mean to hurt you, Ray whispered. We had to fix it. You didn't fix it, I said. You framed me. I looked at Tessa. And you, I said softly. You let me do it. You let me take the fall. And then, tonight, at this party, you dared to call me a fake. You dared to kick the crutch out from under me, the crutch that I only need because you were texting while driving. Tessa looked up. Her eyes were hollow. The golden girl was gone. All that was left was a scared, selfish child who had been protected from reality for too long. I am sorry, Tessa sobbed. Lila, I am so sorry. Sorry doesn't knit bone. Tessa, I said. And sorry doesn't pay back 5 years of psychological torture. Ray stood up. He tried to muster the old authority, the bluster of the patriarch. You can't use this, Ray warned. If you release this, you destroy everything, not just Tessa. You destroy me. You destroy your mother. You will be the girl who sent her own father to prison for obstruction of justice. You belong in prison, Julian said from the corner. His voice was cold steel. Ray ignored him. He focused on me. I will write you out of the family, Ray threatened. I will erase you. You will never set foot in this town again. I still have friends, Lila. I still have power. I looked at him. He looked so pathetic. A king standing in a castle made of cardboard, threatening to exile the only person who knew how to start a fire. You have no power, Ray, I said. You have no money, you have no house, and as of tonight, you have no reputation. We are family, Claudia cried out, rushing toward me. She stopped a few feet away, afraid to touch me. Lila, please, we are your blood. You can't do this to us. You can't destroy your own family. Family, I asked. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. Family protects each other, I said. Family doesn't break their daughter's leg and then bill her for the cast. Family doesn't drag an unconscious body into a driver's seat to save an insurance premium. We made a mistake, Ray shouted. We are begging you. Don't file that affidavit. Don't give it to the police. We will do anything. We will give you the cottage. We will give you whatever you want. I don't want the cottage, I said. I already told you. I have my own assets. Then what do you want? Ray screamed. Revenge, is that it? You want to see us burn? I looked at the affidavit. I looked at the red file of financial ruin. I looked at the black file of the foreclosure. I don't want revenge, I said calmly. Revenge is emotional. Revenge is messy. I am a forensic examiner. Ray, I deal in audits. I deal in balancing the books. I closed the manila folder. You have been living on a deficit of truth for 5 years, I said. You have been spending credibility you didn't have. You have been borrowing against my life to fund your lies. Lila, please, Claudia wept. Don't make this a big thing. We can handle this quietly. I shook my head. I am not making it big. Mom, I said, I am just resizing it. I tapped the stack of files with my finger. I am resizing your life to fit the truth, I said. And the truth is, you are broke, you are criminals, and you are alone. I turned to Julian. I am ready, I said. Julian nodded. He opened the door fully. Where are you going? Ray asked, his voice cracking. To the police station, I said. To hand over the affidavit, and then to a hotel, a nice one. I can afford it. Lila, Ray shouted, if you walk out that door, you are dead to us. I looked back one last time. Dad, I said, a small, sad smile playing on my lips. I have been dead to you since the moment the airbag went off. I just finally decided to attend the funeral. I walked out into the hallway. The air was cooler here. The music from the ballroom had stopped completely. I could hear sirens in the distance, not for us, not yet. But they were coming. They were always coming. My leg hurt. Every step was a battle. But for the first time in 5 years, the pain felt like mine. It wasn't a punishment anymore. It was just a fact, and facts I could handle. I didn't look back at the VIP room. I didn't look back at the screaming, the crying, the begging. I just listened to the rhythmic click of my crutch on the floor. Click, step, drag. It sounded like a countdown. And I had just hit 0. I stopped. The sound of my father hitting the floor was not something I expected. Ray Lane did not kneel. Ray Lane stood on podiums. Ray Lane sat in high-backed leather chairs. Ray Lane looked down on the world, but the sound was unmistakable. It was the heavy, thudding impact of expensive suit fabric hitting the carpet, followed by the cracking of stiff knees. Lila, please, Ray choked out. I turned around slowly. My father was on his knees. His hands, usually manicured and expressive, were clutching the hem of my server's uniform. He looked up at me, and his face was a ruin. The tans seemed to have been scrubbed off, leaving gray, clammy skin. His eyes were wide, wet, and terrified. Next to him, my mother, Claudia, collapsed. She didn't kneel with dignity. She slumped, her silver dress pooling around her like spilled mercury. She grabbed my hand, the hand she had refused to hold for 5 years, and pressed it to her wet cheek. "We will change." Claudia wept, her voice trembling with a desperation that filled the room. "We promise, Lila. We will fix this. We will cut Tessa off. We will write her out of the will tonight. We will throw Mason out. Just save the house. Please. You are the only one who can." I looked at them. I looked at the people who had raised me. For 30 years, their love had been a currency. It was traded for obedience, for beauty, for status. When I was the tennis captain, I was rich in their love. When I was the cripple in the hospital bed, I was bankrupt. Now, they were trying to make a new trade. They were offering up their golden child, Tessa, as a sacrifice to the god of real estate. They were willing to discard her just as easily as they had discarded me, all to keep the keys to a mansion they could no longer afford. "You would do that?" I asked softly. "You would throw Tessa on the street to save your furniture?" "She lied to us," Ray cried, tightening his grip on my skirt. "She stole from us. She is not the daughter we thought she was. But you are smart. Lila, you are successful. You are the good one. You always were the good one." "I am not the good one. Ray," I said, pulling my skirt from his grasp. "I am just the solvent one." "Pay the debt," Ray begged. "You said you have money. You said you have a career. Write the check. Lila, pay off the private equity firm. We will pay you back. We swear. We will sign a promissory note. We will be a family again." I stepped back. The physical distance felt like a chasm. "If I pay the debt," I said, my voice cold and clinical, "then I am just enabling you. I become the new crutch. And we all know what you do to crutches when you think you are strong enough to walk without them. You kick them away." "No," Claudia sobbed. "Never. We love you." "You love the exit strategy," I corrected. I walked back to the table. The Halliburton case was still there. I opened it one last time. There was a hidden compartment in the lid. I hadn't opened it earlier. I had saved it for this exact second. I pulled out a single document. It was bound in heavy blue paper. It looked official. It looked expensive. "You are right about one thing, Dad," I said. "The foreclosure is set for tomorrow morning. The hard money lender, a firm called Ironclad Capital, wants their $2.5 million. "Yes," Ray said, scrambling to his feet, hope igniting in his eyes. "Ironclad, that is them. You know them. Can you talk to them?" "I don't need to talk to them," I said. I placed the document on the table. "I bought them out," I said. The room went silent. Even Tessa stopped crying. Mason looked up from his catatonic state, his eyes narrowing. "What?" Ray whispered. "Distressed debt is a commodity, Dad," I explained, falling into the rhythm of my profession. "It is bought and sold every day. When a lender wants quick liquidity, they sell the note, usually at a discount, but in this case, I paid full face value. I wired $2.5 million to Ironclad Capital 3 days ago." I tapped the document. "This is an assignment of note," I said. "Ironclad Capital assigned all rights, title, and interest in the loan to a holding company called Veritas LLC. Ray blinked. "Veritas, who is Veritas?" "I am," I said. I watched the realization hit him. It was like watching a building implode. The structural integrity of his world just vanished. "You," Ray stammered. "You own the loan." "I own the note," I said. "I own the mortgage. And since the loan is in default, and the foreclosure judgment has already been finalized," I leaned forward, my eyes locking with his. "I own the house," I said. "You can't," Claudia whispered. "You are our daughter." "I am your creditor," I said, "and the creditor owns the collateral." Ray stared at me. He looked at the walls of the VIP room. He looked at the chandelier. He realized that he was standing on my floor. He was breathing my air. "You did this on purpose," Ray hissed, his face flushing red again. "You set us up. You waited until the last minute so you could humiliate us." "I didn't set you up," I said. "Tessa borrowed the money. Mason stole the funds meant to repay it. You signed the guarantees, even if you claim they were forged. Your negligence allowed it to happen. All I did was buy the paper." I looked at Mason. "And speaking of paper," I said, "there is one more thing." I looked toward the main doors of the ballroom. "Dr. Kerr," I said, "if you would." Julian nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He pressed a single button. The doors to the VIP room didn't just open, they were pushed open with authority. 2 men in dark suits entered. They were not wearing tuxedos. They were wearing FBI windbreakers. Behind them were 2 uniformed officers from the county sheriff's department. The music outside had stopped long ago. The guests were gone, ushered out by the nervous management. The ballroom was empty, save for the law. Mason stood up. He tried to run. It was a pathetic attempt. He made it 2 steps toward the service entrance before the first agent blocked his path. "Mason Hartwell," the agent said, holding up a badge. "I am Special Agent Miller with the Financial Crimes Division. We have a warrant for your arrest." "No," Mason screamed. "It is a mistake. I want my lawyer." "You can call him from booking," Agent Miller said. He spun Mason around. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud and metallic. It was the sound of consequences. "Charges include wire fraud, securities fraud, and aggravated identity theft," the agent listed, reciting the litany of Mason's greed. Tessa stood up, shaking. She thought she was safe. She thought she was just the wife. "Tessa Lane Hartwell," the second agent said, stepping toward her. "We have a warrant for your detention as a material witness and co-conspirator in the matter of the forged loan documents." "I didn't mean to," Tessa wailed. She looked at Ray. "Daddy, do something. They are arresting me." Ray stood frozen. He looked at the police. He looked at the handcuffs on his son-in-law. He looked at his daughter being read her rights. He couldn't do anything. His checkbook was empty. His influence was gone. He was just an old man watching his legacy get hauled away in the back of a squad car. "Lila," Tessa screamed as they led her out. "Help me. Tell them I didn't know." I watched her go. I felt a pang of sadness, a ghost of the sisterly love I used to have. But then I remembered the crutch being kicked out from under me. I remembered the laughter. "You knew, Tessa," I whispered. "You just didn't care." The door closed. Mason and Tessa were gone. The room was quiet again. Just me, Julian, Ray, and Claudia. My parents looked like ghosts. They stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the debris of their life. They looked at me with a mixture of fear and awe. "So," Ray said, his voice hollow, "you own the house. Are you going to throw us out tonight?" I looked at my watch. "It is late," I said, "and I am not a monster. I am a businesswoman." I reached into the briefcase and pulled out the final document. It was a standard lease agreement. I placed it on the table. "You can stay," I said. Claudia let out a sob of relief. "Oh, thank God. Thank you, Lila. Thank you." "Read the terms," I said, cutting her off. Ray picked up the paper. "Rent is $10,000 a month," I said. "Fair market value for a property of this size. Payable on the 1st. If you are late, there is a 5% fee. If you miss 2 payments, eviction proceeds immediately." "10,000, Ray gasped. "Lila, we don't have that kind of liquidity. Mason took everything." "Then get a job," I said. "Sell the jewelry, sell the cars. I don't care. That is a tenant problem, not a landlord problem." I pointed to the second page. "Clause 4, I said. "No harassment of the landlord. That means no guilt trips, no calls asking for family favors, no emotional manipulation. If you violate this clause, the lease is void." I looked at them both. "You wanted to live in a mansion," I said. "You can live here, but you live here as my tenants, not as my parents, because parents don't treat their children the way you treated me." I took a pen from the briefcase and set it down next to the lease. "Sign it," I said, "or get out." "You have 5 minutes." I turned away. I didn't watch them sign. I knew they would. They were too proud to be homeless, too weak to leave the stage they had built. They would sign, and they would hate me for it, and they would pay me rent every month to live in the museum of their own failure. "Come on, Julian," I said. Dr. Kerr picked up his briefcase. He offered me his arm. I took it. I didn't lean on him. I just held on. We walked out of the VIP room. We walked through the empty ballroom. The decorations were still up. The happy 60th birthday banner was sagging slightly on the left side. The cake was uncut, sitting in the corner like a sugary tombstone. We walked out the front doors into the humid North Carolina night. The air was fresh. It smelled of rain and pine, not expensive perfume and lies. My ride was waiting, not a rideshare this time. Julian's car, a sensible, black sedan. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs. I looked down at my leg. The brace was tight. The pain was there, a dull, familiar ache, but something had changed. The weight was gone. The weight of their expectations. The weight of their lies. The weight of the debt I never owed. "Are you okay?" Julian asked, opening the car door for me. I looked back at the house. I saw the lights in the VIP room flicker. They were signing. "Yes," I said. "I am." I looked at the crutch in my hand. For 5 years, it had been a symbol of my brokenness. Tonight, it had been a weapon. Tomorrow, it would just be a tool. "They snatched my crutch to prove I was weak," I said, getting into the car. Julian closed the door. He walked around to the driver's side and got in. He started the engine. I looked into the rearview mirror as we drove away, watching the mansion shrink until it was just a speck of light in the darkness. "They thought they were taking my support," I said to the empty road. "But what they really took was the last shred of my patience." And the ledger was finally closed. Thank you so much for listening to Lila's story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Drop your city or country in the comments below, so we can see how far our community reaches. If you enjoyed seeing justice served cold, please make sure to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who need to see the truth win. See you in the next confession.